thank you for joining us. Can you introduce yourself and tell people what you do?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Rachel Donald. I'm a climate corruption journalist and the creator of Planet Critical, which is a journalism platform for a world in crisis. I produce a weekly podcast and a newsletter that go out to subscribers in 164 countries around the world. And, on that, I investigate the intersection of the energy, ecological, and economic crises.
Wow, you said that a few times, haven't you?
Yeah.
Um, I think you start your sessions mostly with this question: is why is the world in crisis?
Oh, no. Yeah, I do. Yeah. And what of it?
Would you like to? I'm. I see you as a person who's you've spoken to so many wonderful and intelligent people who are all operating in this field, if you like. So, what's your conclusion? Why is the world in crisis? You tell me what you think.
I've been getting that question a lot recently. Obviously,
Hmm.
because it's such a big question. It's a good question. It's a hard question, and it's fun to flip it around. Um, because I'm not an expert in any one thing, my relationship to the question and the answers change, and so the answer that I give today will be different to the answers that I gave last week, and it will be, the answers I give tomorrow will be different as well. Because I think the very nature of why the world is in crisis is complex. And so when I ask this question to people that come on my show, I don't expect anybody to answer and give the objective truth. I expect for part of the bigger picture to be filled in. And the idea is that not any one episode of Planet Critical can be listened to individually. It's part of this complex web of, dynamic, interconnected information, essentially, and it's always evolving. But where I am right now with my thinking is the world is in crisis because of supremacist ideologies.
Mm.
And those supremacist ideologies are born out of, it depends. I mean, Carl Safina says, it was kind of Plato who made this distinction between like the material realm as the profane place and there being this like eternal other, this beautiful, perfect realm that was meant for humankind, heaven essentially. But ancient Greece was also already a very hierarchical place where there were slaves and women were second-class citizens. So supremacy obviously started before that as well. I once interviewed Lucy Kroll, who's an economist, who said it began with the agricultural revolution, and that was the first time that humankind sort of figured out how to have this long-lasting and deliberate impact on its environment, and enslaved animals in order to do the labor, and so had to create this divide between the natural world and the world of self in order to justify that kind of exploitation. I think maybe it doesn't particularly matter where the beginning is exactly, but just the fact that we recognize that it is a problem, that there is such a gulf between human and nature and human, and even different parts of ourself. We live in such a divided world, a linear world, an atomized world that sees things so second dimensionally that even language has come to lose meaning. I mean, we live in a post-truth world now. It's incredible that we are arguing over definitions to words, because definitions are culturally constructed over centuries, decades, millennia even. And so I think it just speaks to like the fragmentation of human experience in the world, that the tool with which we use to share our knowledge and pass on information is even coming into question itself. So yeah, I would say human supremacy, which definitely has some kind of relationship to man's search for meaning, or problematic relationship with meaning, which is linked to language. So that's the kind of triangulation where I am right now. And I think it's probably some kind of like flaw or void or question that opens up between meaning and language, that generates this supremacist ideology, you know, something like certain to hold on to in a world that is full of unknowns.
Mm. Yeah, it's you reminded me at the first part of what your answer, you reminded me of Buckminster Fuller, who always kind of said, don't expect me to be this, have the same answer every day. It's going to be evolving all the time. You've mentioned that you were trying to get Dr. Ian McGilchrist on your show, because I think he talks about the left brain, right brain thing, doesn't he? And he's visited it. Yeah. So corruption journalism, what kind of sparked your interest in environmental issues? What started this journey for you?
I also don't really know. Part of my work is deconstructing. So what is the story? What is the truth that we are being told? What's the message? How do you try and get to like some underlying motivation or incentive or message? And then also, how do you construct the new thing, which is much, much, much more difficult. And so part of my like praxis then, you know, politics as practice is not having or not delivering my story in a kind of like hero's narrative. There was no beginning point. There was no kind of like origin. I did some journalism, I did some teaching, I've always liked books, I've always vaguely been interested in justice, not enough to like be a lawyer or anything, because that seemed like too much hard work. But you know, this idea that like society didn't really seem to be working in the way that, you know, the grown-ups said that it was working. That was a pretty strong feeling from a young age. But I fell into this. I mean, it was COVID. I'd listened to an episode of Donut Economic. What is it? Oh, I can't remember. But the really great economics podcast. I can't remember the name of it now. But this guy interviewed Kate Rayworth. Freakonomics. That was it. Freakonomics. Yeah. So he interviewed Kate Rayworth, and I was like, "Oh, that's really good." And I like looked a little bit into economics a couple of years before, and I was really interested in political philosophy. And the environment was kind of on my radar, but nothing more than like, you know, I'd watched Cowspiracy and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I was like a bit politically engaged, put it that way. But it was COVID and I had nothing to do. And I'd run out of ideas because I'd spent my 20s like chasing the big idea, always chasing the big idea. And it was always other people's ideas. I was always like supporting other people with their big ideas. And I ran out of bridges to cross, ran out of relationships to nurture, especially COVID, you know, the world shut down, ran out of ideas. And started a podcast. And I started a podcast because I was like, I want to have interesting conversations with people. That's my favorite thing to do. And it seems like if you say you have a podcast, you get to do that with strangers. So I started that, and I really had no idea what I was doing. And I still maintain I don't really know what I'm doing with regards to Planet Critical. Like, there's no grand plan. Yeah. There's no strategy. I remember once somebody asking me, like, oh, how are you going to market it? And I went, I don't know, sort of do good work and hopefully people will like it. And they were like, that's not a marketing strategy. And I went, yes, I know. That's the idea. Like, why would I want to invest my time strategizing around that? But very early on, I interviewed a woman called Claire Rucastle Brown, who investigated and exposed the largest financial corruption scandal in the history of the world, whereby Malaysian elite, so some of the royals and some of the politicians and the industry, essentially conspired to like deforest the Bornean rainforest and extract loads and loads and loads of resources and money from the Malaysian economy, including stealing, like just draining the pension fund, essentially. Like billions and billions of dollars were stolen. And it ended up all around the world. I mean, and this money funded the Wolf of Wall Street. You know, it bought Miranda Kerr Crystal Piano. It ended up in Hollywood. It ended up everywhere. And she exposed it. And during the episode, she gave me a tip off about Leonardo DiCaprio's involvement. And like I said, I had nothing to do. So I went away and I investigated the story, and I managed to piece it together, reading through the different iterations of the case through the Department of Justice over the years. And I sent it to her. I was like, thanks for the tip off. And she called me up. She said, did you do this? And I said, yeah. And she went, I'll call you back. And so
Mm.
she called me back a few weeks later, and she needed help, researching a story. And then it became, could you write this story? And then one day I called her. I was like, I'm available for work because I have nothing else to do if you would like to officialize this. And so she made me producer of Radio Free Sarawak, which is the only independent radio news show in Malaysia, reporting on Indigenous stories by Indigenous people with support from Europe, essentially. And we were the only news team, like really hammering at these corrupt links between industry, like deforestation, the logging industry, and politics. Um, and so essentially, I was getting this like first-hand look into systems. I didn't have that language yet, but I was getting a first-hand look into how all of this corruption was impacting the forest, which was impacting the indigenous people and impacting the local climate because they kept having the worst flooding in 10 years every month. And the fact as well that like the forest couldn't handle the flooding because the soil had been eroded by the deforestation. And so people, like entire cultures, were getting washed away because of it. And also that the international community was doing nothing about it because they need the resources coming out of Malaysia. I mean, it was firsthand look into how all of the pieces of the puzzle work, how they fit together. And at the same time, I was doing this podcast, it was increasingly about how capitalism is like a really, really bad economic system. And gradually those things met. I think it was about 10 months in, I interviewed Steve Keen on the economics of climate change. And I went, yeah, that's it. That's what I want to do. And it became Planet Critical. And that was, when did I rebrand? October 2021. And now it's amazingly, it's like one of the top podcasts on like climate, eco, energy, all this kind of stuff.
Yes, there seems to be it's the field is emerging when these people are rising out of it, aren't they, or whatever, the system is will bring people to the fore. I find that with leadership quite a lot, is the fact that the people that really stand out are the ones that you don't see coming. You wouldn't have pegged them as a leader at the beginning, but then bang, they just step forward and do something miraculous. You mentioned a couple of influential people in your journey, but of the people that you've interviewed, which have changed your direction in thinking or given you
All of them.
insights? All of them.
All of them. All of them. There's no, I mean, Steve Keen, that really that helped me rebrand, which was coming anyway. I knew it had to come. But every single interviewee has been critical to the evolution of my thought. And the most interesting or the most important are the ones that I did last week. And before that, it was the week before, and the week before, and the week before.
Gotcha.
And I really do think that that is so important. Again, it's like still driving this message of like, it is an interconnected web of thought. That's what we all exist in all the time. So I think that like I found the relationship between energy and materials and economy like perhaps the most surprising. That really took my breath away when I learned when I spoke to those scholars kind of at the beginning, because I had no idea how interconnected all of these things were, and I'm still learning about it now. But the show wouldn't be, and I wouldn't be who I am without equally interviewing all of those artists and writers and activists whose language perhaps I already had. Being a writer myself, studying literature, just sort of really being interested in books. But they are just as critical.
So it's like an evolution, really, isn't it? What kind of challenges have you faced doing, starting Planet Critical, would you say?
Well, I made no money for like 2 years. So I was like, big shout out to my adopted family in the Netherlands. That's where I was over COVID, with my partner at the time and his family. And they were like just incredibly supportive people. They were like, yeah, cool, this thing is making you happy, just go off and do it. So big, asterisks of privilege there. Like I was supported to do this thing. Apart from that, I don't know. It's all been quite, how do I put this? There have been lots of other stressors, like the fact that I didn't make money from it. So like my main challenge was like, how do I make money to live? Especially when I just felt very unemployable. Like my 20s had been, how do I put this correctly? I had done a lot of different things in my 20s, and the thing that had always been revealed to me was that I do not like being employed, and I'm not made to be employed. So the main challenge was like, how do I get enough money to keep this side project going that is making me happy? Um, I don't think I thought that Planet Critical would be my main thing. I genuinely wasn't thinking about it as like, this is going to be my career and this is who I am and yada, 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 yada. Because that wasn't how I approached it. And I think that was the main thing. Like, I got out of the way of the project, and thus it was successful because
Mm.
I allowed it to be influenced in a sense by so many other people, and I didn't have a firm vision of where I was going. And I actually really would advise people of like, if you've got a firm vision of where you're going, cool, great, well done on being so decisive and creative. Also approach that with flexibility though.
Mm.
Because if you stick to the vision that you had at day one, then it means you have not updated your thought process since day one. And I imagine you will have learned more along the way. Um, so I think now my big challenge is still trying to stay out of its way,
Mm.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because apart from that, it was like there was a sense of there's always been a sense of ease around Planet Critical. Like people want to be in, it turns out I'm quite good at interviewing people and people want to be interviewed. And I'm like really curious about loads more things than I thought I was. And I write well quickly, which is important when you have like a weekly column to go out. With regards to my journalism, the biggest challenge was actually getting paper stories placed in the paper, because the more that I learn, the more I have this like big picture perspective on the world, and the less that I was capable of just doing news stories, because it was like, well,
Mm.
journalism has a role to play as well in analysis, and like if you take this lens, this is also important, and arguing with editors, no, like that detail about that thing happening in that other country is important, and like I can't, you're gonna have to give me another 500 words to explain why, but just trust me that it needs to be in there. And so I gave up placing my climate corruption stories in. I got a couple of world exclusives, but I mostly gave up placing them in major newspapers, because like journalism is not built for that kind of like interconnected web thinking in its current form in the mainstream. And that's why now everything just goes out to my subscribers directly, because
Mm.
I can write in the way that I want to write. So yeah, long answer, but I think my main challenge has always been dealing with the way that things are, because I think that they could be done better.
Mm.
And I got lucky by happening to create a thing.
If you, yeah, yeah, again, it's that emergence, isn't it? That's you
Mm-hmm.
seem to have quite a polymathic approach to your thinking. It's you're learning new things all the time, and then you're trying to find the interconnections of them all the time. And obviously, with complexity, it's growing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, mastery of both worlds, I call it. When you've got to, how do you survive in this world while you try to create the next one? Um, yeah, what's if you're listening, first of all, overall positive outlook, negative outlook at the moment. Which one? Where are you at?
On what?
Just survival of planet Earth or survival of the human race? The planet will be here. Society. What are the chances of society changing?
Oh, society's going to change no matter what.
Yeah.
Because we're going to run up to hard limits to resources, which are going to fundamentally change. And society's already changing.
Mm.
Um, I think Biden's Inflation Reduction Act will be seen as a huge, huge piece of like political activism in the future, because he really ramped up state involvement in the market. And I think we kind of said goodbye to the deregulation of neoliberalism, and also even like the economic wars that are being fought at the moment, like the USA slapping tariffs on China and China responding in kind by increasing prices of rare earth minerals, in particular copper. So the economic structures are already changing. So society is already changing. The world order is already changing. I mean, the energy suppliers are now coming together in more obvious allyships that exclude the West, Europe, the United States, because we've got BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, all coming in together to be this sort of like a political bloc. So I think the age of Western empire is over.
Mhm.
And I don't really have an ascription of like positive or negative to that. And I would kind of encourage everyone to move beyond these sort of binaries, because like the world is going to be what it is, and we're just going to have to figure out how to make do with it. I think that it is such a ripe moment for change, and we are seeing really wonderful things happen. I mean, just today, a female climate scientist was elected to be president of Mexico. Mexico, like,
Yeah.
wow, that is amazing. I think that there is such potential for good, smart politics to come out of the global south, the majority world, that have historically been so much more left-leaning and communal and eco as well in their homegrown politics. Certainly in the 20th century. How the West will cope with the devaluation of its own power and status is a major concern, because with regards to how the United States is facilitating one of its allies act with impunity in the Middle East, and is acting with impunity itself, therefore, and is disregarding international law and undermining the International Court of Justice, it doesn't look like the West is ready to hand over the reins of power, or even come to the negotiating table with the understanding of like, we are not in as good a position as we ever have been. And so will you please, how can we create a new world order that is collaborative rather than hierarchical and competitive? I am very worried about fascism in the valleys of the old empire, the United States, the United Kingdom, Europe. Very, very concerned about the far right. That is the exact opposite of the political structures that we need to confront the eco crisis, as I call it, the climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, water crisis, all this. And with regards to the eco crisis, it's off the charts. It's worse than scientists were predicting, just a couple of years ago. I think that we are going to see food shortages. I mean, we already are, but I think that they're going to be widespread. I think we're going to see water shortages. I think we're going to see wars fought increasingly and more obviously over these kinds of resources. I think that the political structures within which we exist, i.e., that the world is a playground for the very few, and they extract from the very many in order to create that playground, will become increasingly obvious. And that as resistance builds, either through homegrown resistance or through these new political allyships in the majority world, what we will see is the ruling class come home to extract and exploit from their own populations. We kind of already have seen that since 2008, really. Or rather, 2008 was triggered even from that, the financial crash. And just a shout out, Peter Turchin has got a great book called End Times on that exact kind of like plotting the ends of civilizations, which is all sort of elite over exploitation. It's not looking great. It's really, it's not looking great. But there is, every time I think it's not looking great, there's also these moments of just like, wow, like what happened in Mexico today is absolutely historic. And how countries around the world have rallied around the Palestinian people as well.
Yeah.
It's a crunch point. And I don't think it's going to either be good or bad. The result is going to be really, really, really complex, but we should never think that the moment to act or to change or to mitigate or to adapt was behind us. It's always now. It's always right now.
Mm. In view of the changes that are happening and the fact that you're around this material all the time, how do you maintain your kind of well-being, mental health? Or do you just get a buzz from being around it anyway? So,
I think I'm very emotionally resilient, thanks to a couple of things. Number one, loads of therapy. Number two, loads of psychedelics. Psychedelics really changed my relationship to the world. I would highly recommend anybody who is interested in them going off and reading about them to begin with. If I haven't read this book because I just dove in and started doing them. But How to Change Your Mind, from what I understand, is a really, really excellent book. And it was the psychedelics essentially that really helped me find my place in the world, which is that it's very small. I don't have any egotistical or egoic rather desire to change the world anymore, which I think I had a lot in my 20s. I just want to have a good time doing a good thing.
mm.
And I think that I found that with the niche in my work. And it is that kind of like, I feel like I'm in on the joke with the cosmos. That's how I keep my emotional resilience. Like, none of it matters. None of us like matter. It's all like, is any of it real? Don't know. Does it matter? No. So what does matter? What matters are the meanings that we make. So like the fact that we are all so insignificant and yet we get to choose our own meaning. That's beautiful. And it's part of this kind of like Taoist both and, contrasting things being true at the same time. And it's when you figure out how to kind of like whole balance those things, juggle those things, and you exist between them, that everything just becomes funny. And what I mean by that is not that like genuine suffering becomes funny, or unfairness becomes funny, or inequality becomes, none of that is funny. And I feel a huge amount of sadness for the genuine material conditions of so many people and the species with whom we share this planet. But the fact that there are species on a planet in the universe hurtling through space, I mean, that's got to be some joke, isn't it? Like the fact that you and I can talk, like it's all, there's an element of a joke to it. And even the fact that like all of these things that people think are so important, when people, especially people talk about the economy, I find it so fun. I'm like, what is the economy? Or what is the left wing? What is the right wing? What is language? Like if we can just take a step back from the gravitas of the situation that is fundamentally man-made, we would see that we all have the opportunity to be in on the joke together. And it would genuinely be funny. This would be Eden. This would be total paradise if everybody could stop hurting one another to be in on the joke together for long enough. So that's how I keep going.
That sounds like an excellent place to finish. Thank you very much for that survival guide in how to be part of the wild journey, I suppose. Thank you very much for your time. Anyway.
Thank you so much.